Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most debated questions in the Game of Thrones universe. Was Ned Stark actually honorable? Now, I know what you're thinking. Of course he was honorable. That's literally his defining characteristic. But stick with me here, because by the end of this video, you might just question everything you thought you knew about the Warden of the North. Before we begin, if you're a fan of deep dives into Game of Thrones characters, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We've got plenty more character analyses coming your way, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. So let's start with the obvious. Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North, Hand of the King. The man who everyone in Westeros knew as the most honorable lord in the Seven Kingdoms. His reputation was so solid that even his enemies acknowledged it. When you think of Ned Stark, you think of a man who always does the right thing, no matter the cost. A man who values truth, justice, and duty above all else. A man whose word is his bond. But here's where things get interesting, and this is what we're going to explore today. The name Stark itself is incredibly telling. It's not just a cool sounding name that George R.R. Martin pulled out of thin air. Something Stark means simple, severe, rigid. It's black and white with no gray areas in between. And that's exactly how Ned approaches the world at the beginning of a Game of Thrones. For him, there's right and there's wrong. There's honor and there's dishonor. There's duty and there's betrayal. No middle ground. No compromises. No shades of gray. We see this from the very first chapter of the series. Ned executes a deserter from the Night's Watch because that's what the law demands. He doesn't hesitate. He doesn't question whether the man's story about White Walkers might be true. The law is clear. Deserters must die, and Ned follows the law. But here's what makes Ned different from other lords who might execute deserters. He does it himself. He swings the sword, and he explains to his son Bran why this matters. If you would take a man's life, you owe it to him to look into his eyes and hear his final words. That's responsibility. That's accountability. That's honor, right? This philosophy defines Ned throughout his time in the North. He's a lord who sits in judgment, who dispenses justice, who makes the hard decisions. And he does it all with this unwavering moral compass that points true north, no pun intended. His bannermen love him for it. His family respects him for it. The North remembers Ned Stark as a man who never wavered, who never compromised, who never broke his word. But then Robert Baratheon shows up at Winterfell and everything changes. The king wants Ned to come to King's Landing and serve as Hand of the King. And this is where we need to talk about Robert for a minute, because understanding Robert is crucial to understanding Ned's story. Robert and Ned were best friends. They grew up together as wards of Jon Arryn in the Vale. They fought together in Robert's Rebellion. They shed blood together. They celebrated victories together. They were brothers in all but name. But here's the thing, Robert was never the man Ned thought he was. Or maybe more accurately, Robert changed, and Ned couldn't or wouldn't see it. The Robert who comes to Winterfell in the first season is a shadow of the warrior who won the throne. He's fat, he's drunk, he's surrounded by Lannisters who are clearly using him. He talks about killing Daenerys Targaryen, a teenage girl across the narrow sea who poses no real threat to him. He's bitter, he's angry, and he's completely unfit to rule. And Ned knows this. Deep down, he has to know this. He sees Robert for what he's become. But when Robert asks him to serve as Hand, Ned agrees. Why? Because of duty, because of honor, because you don't say no to your king, especially when that king is your oldest friend. But let's pause here and ask a critical question. Is it honorable to enable a bad king? Is it honorable to prop up a system that's clearly broken? Is it honorable to serve a man who you know is making terrible decisions? Ned tells himself he's going to King's Landing to help Robert, to guide him, to be the voice of reason in a corrupt court. But is that what actually happens? Or does Ned simply become part of the problem? When Robert wants to assassinate Daenerys and her unborn child, Ned objects. He resigns as Hand in protest. And good for him, right? He's standing up for what's right. He's refusing to participate in the murder of innocents. That's classic Ned Stark honor. But let's think about the consequences of that decision. Ned resigns and rides away from King's Landing with a clear conscience. He gets to keep his honor intact. But what about Daenerys? His resignation doesn't save her. Robert just finds someone else to plan the assassination. Varys even tells Ned this directly. Your going or staying will make no difference. So Ned's grand moral stand accomplishes exactly nothing except making himself feel better. Is that really honor, or is that just self-righteousness? And this brings us to what I think is a central question we need to explore. What does honor actually mean? Because Ned has a very specific definition of honor. It's about following the rules, keeping your oaths, telling the truth, doing your duty. It's about maintaining a reputation, about being able to look at yourself in the mirror and know you did the right thing. But what if the rules are unjust? What if your oaths conflict with each other? What if telling the truth will get innocent people killed? What if your duty leads to terrible outcomes? Let's talk about the biggest example of this. The secret that defines Ned's entire adult life. Jon Snow. For the entire series, everyone believes Jon is Ned's bastard son, the product of some affair Ned had during Robert's rebellion. And this belief destroys Ned's reputation as an honorable man. People whisper about it. Catelyn resents it. It's this permanent stain on Ned's otherwise spotless honor. But we learn the truth in Season 6. Jon isn't Ned's son at all. He's Ned's nephew, the son of Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen. Ned promised his dying sister that he would protect Jon, which meant hiding his true identity. Because if Robert had found out that Lyanna gave birth to Rhaegar's child, he would have killed Jon immediately. So Ned lied. For 15 years, he lied to everyone, to his wife, to his children, to his best friend, to the entire realm. Now, the show presents this as this beautiful, tragic act of honor. Ned sacrificed his reputation to protect his nephew. He let everyone think he was an adulterer because that was the only way to keep Jon safe. And yes, that's admirable, that's loving, that's selfless. But is it honorable? Because remember Ned's definition of honor. Honor means telling the truth. Honor means keeping your oaths. Honor means not lying, not deceiving, not playing games. And Ned broke all of those rules. He lied constantly about Jon. He let Catelyn believe he betrayed her. He even lied to Jon himself, letting the boy grow up thinking he was a bastard, never knowing his true parentage. Ned swore oaths to Robert, oaths of friendship and loyalty, and he broke those oaths every single day by hiding Jon's identity. Because Jon wasn't just some random Targaryen. Jon was the legitimate heir to the Iron Throne, assuming Rhaegar and Lyanna were married, which the show suggests they were. So Ned was harboring the rightful king, hiding him from the man who sat on the throne. From a certain perspective, that's treason. That's the exact opposite of honor. Now, I'm not saying Ned should have told Robert the truth. That would have gotten Jon killed. What I'm saying is that Ned's situation was impossible. There was no honorable solution. He could either protect Jon, which required lying and deceiving, or he could tell the truth and let an innocent child die. He chose to protect Jon, and I think most people would agree that was the right choice. But it wasn't the honorable choice according to Ned's own standards. And this is where we get into the really interesting psychological territory. Because Ned spent 15 years living with this massive contradiction. He built his entire identity around being an honorable man who never lied, who always told the truth, who kept his oaths, but his entire life was built on a lie. How did he reconcile that? The answer is he compartmentalized. He created mental barriers that kept these contradictions separate so they never had to confront each other. He convinced himself that he was protecting Jon out of honor, out of his promise to Lyanna, and therefore the lie was somehow honorable. But let's dig even deeper, because the Jon Snow Secret isn't the only place where Ned's honor gets complicated. Let's talk about Robert's rebellion itself. The war started because Rhaegar Targaryen supposedly abducted Lyanna Stark. Ned's father and brother went to King's Landing to demand her return, and the Mad King Aerys burned them alive. So Ned joined Jon Arryn and Robert in rebellion. They fought, they won, and Robert took the throne. But here's what we learn later. Rhaegar didn't abduct Lyanna. They were in love. They ran away together. They got married and had a child. Now, Ned probably didn't know this at the time. He probably really did think his sister was kidnapped and raped. But at some point, probably at the Tower of Joy when Lyanna was dying, he learned the truth. And what did he do with that information? Nothing. He kept it secret. Because if people found out that Lyanna went willingly, that she chose Rhaegar over Robert, that the entire war was based on a misunderstanding, well, that would complicate things, wouldn't it? It would mean Robert's claim to the throne was even more questionable. It would mean thousands of people died for nothing. It would mean Ned and Robert were in some sense, usurpers, and Ned couldn't deal with that, so he buried the truth. He let everyone continue believing that Rhaegar was a monster who kidnapped Lyanna. He let Robert continue hating Rhaegar and all Targaryens. He never spoke up, never corrected the record, never tried to bring any kind of reconciliation or understanding. Because doing so would have complicated his neat, simple worldview where Robert was the rightful king and Ned was an honorable man serving him. Let's talk about what happened during the sack of King's Landing, because this is crucial to understanding Ned's character. Robert's forces took the city, Jaime Lannister killed King Aerys, and then Tywin Lannister presented Robert with the bodies of Rhaegar's wife Elia and their children who had been brutally murdered. And Robert accepted this. He saw it as proof of Tywin's loyalty. He essentially sanctioned the murder of children, and Ned was disgusted by this. He and Robert fought about it. Ned wanted Robert to punish the Lannisters for killing children, but Robert refused, and Ned, in his anger and disappointment, left King's Landing and went back to Winterfell. And here's the question. Was that the honorable thing to do? To storm off in a huff because your friend made a decision you disagreed with? Because by leaving, Ned essentially gave up any chance to influence Robert, any chance to push back against the Lannisters, any chance to create a more just peace. He got to keep his moral purity, but at what cost? The Lannisters grew stronger, Robert grew more reckless, the realm suffered, and Ned sat in Winterfell for 15 years, isolated in the north, convincing himself that he was honorable because he wasn't participating in the corruption of King's Landing. But is non-participation really honor? Or is it just cowardice disguised as principle? Some critics have argued that Ned should have taken the throne himself. When he arrived in the throne room and found Jaime sitting on the Iron Throne, Ned could have claimed it. He had the forces, he had the legitimacy as the one who defeated the Targaryens. He could have shaped Westeros according to his vision of justice, but he didn't. He gave the throne to Robert. Why? Because of some abstract notion of Robert's claim through his Targaryen grandmother. Because of friendship? Because of loyalty. But was that really the right choice? Robert was never going to be a good king. Ned knew this, or should have known this. Robert was a warrior, not a ruler. He was great at smashing things with his hammer, but terrible at the hard work of governance. And Ned enabled him. He put Robert on the throne, and then walked away, washing his hands of the consequences. Now, let's fast forward to when Ned finally returns to King's Landing as Hand of the King. This is where we really see Ned's honor tested, and where he ultimately fails. Ned starts investigating Jon Arryn's death and discovers the truth. Joffrey and his siblings are not Robert's children. They're the product of incest between Cersei and Jaime Lannister. This is huge. This means Joffrey has no legitimate claim to the throne. This means the succession is completely invalid. And what does Ned do? He confronts Cersei, he tells her what he knows, he gives her warning, time to flee with her children before he tells Robert the truth, and he does this because of mercy, because of honor, because he doesn't want to see children harmed. It's a noble impulse, but it's also incredibly naive, because Cersei doesn't flee. Instead, she uses the time Ned gave her to plot against him. She has Robert killed, she turns the city watch against Ned, and she has him arrested for treason. Was Ned's decision honorable? He was trying to protect innocent children, but he was also protecting Cersei, who is a monster, and by warning her, he gave up his only advantage. Some people might call that stupid, not honorable. Littlefinger even tells Ned this directly. You wear your honor like a suit of armor, Stark. You think it keeps you safe, but all it does is weigh you down and make it hard for you to move. And that's exactly what happens. Ned's honor paralyzes him. When he needs to be ruthless, he hesitates. When he needs to lie, he tells the truth. When he needs to strike first, he warns his enemy, and it gets him killed. In the Game of Thrones, you win or you die, as Cersei says. There is no middle ground, and Ned's honor left him completely unprepared for this reality. But let's talk about Ned's final choice, because this is where things get really complicated. After he's arrested, Varys comes to him in the dungeons. Varys offers him a deal. Confess to treason, lie and say you were plotting against Joffrey, and they'll spare your life. You can take the black, join the Night's Watch, and at least you'll be alive. Your daughters will be safe. And Ned refuses at first, because confessing to treason would be a lie. It would stain his honor. It would mean admitting to crimes he didn't commit. But then Varys points out that Sansa is still a hostage. If Ned maintains his innocence, if he clings to his honor, Joffrey might kill Sansa. So Ned has to choose between his honor and his daughter's life. And he chooses his daughter. He agrees to lie. He agrees to confess to treason. And when he's brought before the Sept of Baelor, with Sansa watching, with the whole city watching, Ned Stark does something he's never done before. He lies to save someone he loves. He says, "I am Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell and Hand of the King. I come before you to confess my treason in the sight of gods and men." Every word of that confession is a lie, but Ned says it anyway, because in that moment, love is more important than honor. His daughter's life is more important than his reputation. And I think this is actually Ned's most honorable moment. Not the times when he told the truth because it was easy, but this moment when he lied because it was necessary. When he sacrificed the thing he valued most, his honor, his reputation, his legacy, to protect his child. Of course, Joffrey betrays the deal and orders Ned's execution anyway. But that doesn't change the significance of Ned's choice. In his final moments, Ned Stark learned what Maester Aemon tried to teach Jon Snow. Love is the bane of honor, the death of duty. What is honor compared to a woman's love? What is duty against the feel of a newborn son in your arms? So was Ned Stark actually honorable? I think the answer is both yes and no. Yes, Ned tried to be honorable according to his definition of honor. He tried to tell the truth, keep his oaths, do his duty. He genuinely believed in these principles and tried to live by them. And in many ways, he succeeded. He was a good father, a decent lord, a man who tried to do right by his people. But no, Ned wasn't purely honorable, because pure honor is impossible in a world like Westeros. The reality is that Ned lied constantly about Jon Snow. He enabled Robert's terrible kingship. He walked away from King's Landing when he could have stayed and fought for justice. He gave Cersei the chance to destroy him. He compromised his principles again and again, but he never admitted it to himself or anyone else. And maybe that's the real problem with Ned's honor. Not that he failed to live up to it, because everyone fails sometimes, but that he couldn't acknowledge his own complexity. He couldn't admit that sometimes honor requires lies, that sometimes duty conflicts with justice, that sometimes the right choice is the dishonorable one. He built this rigid identity as the honorable Ned Stark, and that identity trapped him. Think about the other characters who survive in Game of Thrones. Tyrion, who lies and schemes and plays the game. Sansa, who learns to wear masks and manipulate. Arya, who becomes an assassin. Jon Snow, who breaks his vows and makes compromises. Daenerys, who does terrible things in pursuit of what she believes is justice. All of these characters learn that survival requires flexibility, requires getting your hands dirty, requires acknowledging the moral complexity of their world. But Ned never learned that lesson, or he learned it too late. By the time he agreed to confess to treason, he'd already lost. His inflexibility, his inability to adapt, his rigid adherence to an impossible standard of honor, these things doomed him. And yet, and this is important, Ned's legacy lives on. The North remembers. His children remember. They remember a father who loved them, who tried to protect them, who taught them important lessons about responsibility and justice. They remember a man who cared about doing the right thing even when it was hard. They remember someone who tried to be better than the corrupt, cynical world around him. Is that honor? Maybe honor isn't about never lying or never compromising. Maybe honor is about trying to do the right thing even when it's complicated, about protecting the people you love even when it costs you, about standing up for justice even when you know you'll lose, about maintaining your humanity in a world that rewards cruelty. By that definition, maybe Ned Stark was the most honorable man in Westeros after all. Not because he followed rules perfectly, but because he kept trying to be good in a world that punished goodness. Not because he never made mistakes, but because he cared about the consequences of his actions. Not because he was pure, but because he was trying. The tragedy of Ned Stark is that his honor got him killed, but the triumph of Ned Stark is that his honor inspired others. Jon Snow trying to do the right thing as Lord Commander. Sansa learning to be strong while maintaining her compassion. Arya holding on to her identity despite everything. Robb fighting for justice even though it's hopeless. These are all echoes of Ned's honor, transformed and adapted for a crueler world. So when we ask, was Ned Stark actually honorable, we're really asking what honor means. If honor means following rigid rules and never compromising, then no, Ned wasn't honorable because he lied about Jon and made countless compromises. But if honor means trying to be decent in an indecent world, trying to protect the innocent, trying to do right even when it's hard, then yes, Ned Stark was one of the most honorable men in the series. The real lesson of Ned Stark isn't that honor is foolish or that good people can't survive in a cruel world. The real lesson is that honor is complicated, that doing the right thing often requires doing things that seem wrong, that protecting people sometimes means lying to them, that justice and mercy don't always align, that love and duty pull in different directions. Ned Stark was a man who tried to live by simple principles in a complex world, and that mismatch destroyed him, but it also made him heroic. Because in a world where everyone is scheming and lying and betraying, where honor is just a word people use to manipulate others, Ned Stark actually tried to live up to that word. He failed, as everyone must fail, but he tried. And that trying, that effort to be better, that refusal to give in completely to cynicism and cruelty, maybe that's what true honor looks like. In the end, Ned Stark was a man, not a saint. He made mistakes, he told lies, he compromised his principles, but he also loved his family, tried to protect the innocent, and attempted to make the world a little bit better. Was he actually honorable? You'll have to decide that for yourself. But I think the more important question is, what kind of honor is worth having? And what kind of person do we want to be in a world that often punishes goodness? Those are the questions Ned Stark forces us to confront. And that's why, years after his death in season 1, we're still talking about him, still debating his choices, still trying to understand what his life and death meant. Because Ned Stark represents something we all struggle with, the attempt to be good in a complicated world. And whether he succeeded or failed, that attempt is worth remembering. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments what you think. Was Ned Stark truly honorable, or was his honor just an illusion? Did he make the right choices, or were his principles his downfall? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next character analysis. Until next time, the North remembers.